The last thing billionaire Jamal Washington expected when he walked into St. Mary's Church was to witness a 7-year-old girl selling her soul to God for a father. Desperation has a sound, and it echoes differently in empty churches than anywhere else on earth. The amber glow of evening light filtered through centuries-old stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows across worn wooden pews, where little Aaliyah Martinez knelt like a penitent seeking absolution. Her tiny fists were clenched so tightly that her brown knuckles had turned pale, and her voice carried the kind of raw hope that only children possess, the dangerous kind that believes miracles are just prayers away. "Please, God," she whispered, her words bouncing off cathedral ceilings like desperate birds seeking escape. "Oh, my friends have daddies who come to their school plays, and tomorrow is the biggest one of the whole year." Sometimes the universe conspires to place broken people in the same sacred spaces, as if even heaven believes in the mathematics of mutual healing. Jamal sat frozen in the last pew, his $3,000 Italian leather shoes feeling suddenly obscene against the humble church floor that had been polished smooth by generations of faithful knees. He'd come here seeking something he couldn't name, solace, perhaps, or maybe just silence after losing the biggest business deal of his 15-year career, a merger worth $400 million that had evaporated like morning mist when his partner betrayed him to competitors. The irony cut through him like glass. A man worth more money than most people could imagine, brought to his knees by corporate treachery, hiding in a house of worship while a child prayed for something his wealth couldn't purchase. The sound of a breaking heart is different when it comes from someone who still believes in happy endings. "I don't want to be different anymore," Aaliyah continued, tears carving silver tracks down her chocolate-colored cheeks, her voice cracking with the weight of disappointment that seemed impossible for such small shoulders to bear. Her school uniform, a white polo shirt that had seen better days, and a navy skirt with a small stain near the hem, told the story of a family stretching every dollar until it screamed, and Jamal found himself leaning forward despite his intention to remain invisible. The moment when two strangers' pain recognizes itself in another person can reshape the entire trajectory of human existence. As Aaliyah rose from her knees, her movement fluid despite her tears, she turned toward the aisle, and her bright brown eyes locked onto Jamal's startled gaze with the precision of a heat-seeking missile finding its target. For a heartbeat that felt like eternity, neither moved. A broken billionaire and a heartbroken child, both carrying burdens that seemed impossible to bear alone, while the church seemed to hold its breath like a living thing waiting for whatever miracle or disaster would come next. The late afternoon sun shifted through the stained glass windows, painting them both in shades of amber and gold, and Jamal realized that everything he thought he knew about success was about to crumble like ancient stone. "Are you okay, mister?" are 4 words that could demolish a man's entire worldview in less than 3 seconds. Innocence approaches danger with the fearlessness of someone who hasn't learned that the world can devour hope like a starving beast. Aaliyah walked toward him with the casual confidence of a child who still believed in the fundamental goodness of humanity, her worn purple backpack dragging behind her like a loyal pet, leaving tiny scuff marks on the polished stone floor. Her school uniform was slightly wrinkled from a day of learning and playing, but her eyes held a wisdom that seemed far beyond her 7 years, the kind of premature understanding that comes from watching her mother work 3 jobs and still struggle to keep food on the table. Jamal found himself straightening his silk tie, a nervous habit that had served him well in boardrooms full of sharks, but felt ridiculous under the innocent scrutiny of someone who probably didn't know what a quarterly profit report was. The first genuine smile Jamal had felt in weeks cracked across his face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, surprising him with its authenticity. Despite the wreckage of his professional life, despite the betrayal that had cost him everything he'd built over 15 years of 80-hour work weeks, He couldn't help but be charmed by this small person who approached his pain with such matter-of-fact compassion. "You look pretty sad too, little one," he said gently, crouching down so their eyes were level, noting how her bottom lip trembled slightly despite her brave facade. Up close, he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, the way her shoulders seemed too small to carry whatever burden she was bearing, and something twisted in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he learned to armor his heart against emotion during his brutal climb to the top of the corporate world. The question that would reshape both their destinies came wrapped in the innocent honesty of a child who had already lost too much to be afraid to ask for miracles. "I have a really big problem," she whispered, conspiratorially, glancing around the empty church as if she were about to share classified government secrets with someone who might actually have the power to help. "Tomorrow is my school play, and I'm going to sing a solo from Annie. But I don't have a daddy to come watch me like all the other kids do." Her voice broke on the word daddy, and Jamal felt his carefully constructed emotional walls begin to develop hairline fractures. Then she looked up at him with eyes that held the kind of desperate hope that could either save souls or destroy them, and asked the question that would change everything. "Can you be my daddy?"
"Just for one day, please?" Acacia Martinez had survived poverty, discrimination, and the daily marathon of single motherhood, but finding her daughter talking to a strange man in their sanctuary nearly stopped her heart completely. Fear moves through a mother's body like electricity through water, instant, consuming, and potentially lethal to anyone who threatens her child. The sound of her sensible work shoes clicking against the stone floor echoed through the church like gunshots as she rushed toward them, her pulse hammering against her throat with the intensity of a jackhammer breaking concrete. She'd only been gone 20 minutes, just long enough to finish cleaning the fellowship hall and lock up the kitchen where she volunteered 3 evenings a week. But in that brief span of time, her entire world had shifted off its axis, like a planet knocked out of orbit. The man was clearly wealthy, his charcoal suit probably costing more than she made in 4 months of double shifts at Murphy's Diner, which somehow made his presence even more unsettling than if he'd been obviously dangerous. "Acacia!" she called out, her voice sharp with the kind of protective fear that could cut glass, every maternal instinct in her body screaming danger signals like a fire alarm in the middle of the night. The stranger was tall, at least 6'3", with the kind of commanding presence that suggested power and authority, but wealth didn't equal safety, especially when it came to her daughter's well-being. Keisha had learned early in life that people with money often believed it gave them the right to take whatever they wanted, and her baby girl was the most precious thing in her universe, worth more than all the gold in Fort Knox and all the diamonds in South Africa combined. Acacia bounced toward her with the oblivious enthusiasm of a child who believed the world was fundamentally safe, completely unaware of the tension crackling in the sacred air like lightning before a storm. Keisha's arms went around her daughter instinctively, pulling her close while keeping her eyes fixed on the stranger who seemed to fill the church with an energy that was both magnetic and dangerous. "This is, Aaliyah paused, turning back to the man with the casual confidence of someone introducing friends at a playground. "What's your name again, mister? I forgot to ask you before I asked you to be my daddy." The name hit Keisha like a physical blow, recognition slamming into her consciousness with the force of a freight train at full speed. "Jamal Washington," he said, rising to his full, imposing height, his voice smooth as aged bourbon with undertones that suggested boardrooms and power lunches and decisions that affected thousands of lives. Everyone in the city knew that name. The tech mogul whose face graced magazine covers, whose company employed half the downtown district, whose personal wealth could probably buy and sell our entire neighborhood without him even noticing the expense. But non-recognition didn't equal trust, and money certainly didn't make a man safe around children, especially not her child, the bright center of her universe who trusted too easily and loved too freely for this cruel world. "I'll $50,000 if you let me take your daughter to her school play tomorrow." 11 words that made Keisha question everything she thought she knew about right, wrong, and the price of desperation. Money has a way of making even the most impossible propositions sound reasonable, like a siren song that promises salvation while leading ships toward jagged rocks. The offer hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire, visible and choking, while Keisha's grip on her daughter's small hand tightened involuntarily as she processed what she just heard. $50,000. More money than she'd see in 3 years of working double shifts at the diner, of volunteering countless hours at the church for free meals, of stretching every dollar until it screamed like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. But the very fact that this stranger thought her daughter's affection could be purchased made her blood boil like water in an overheated kettle, every maternal instinct she possessed roaring to life. "Excuse me?" The words came out sharp as broken glass, each syllable designed to cut. She positioned herself between Jamal and Acacia like a shield made of flesh and determination, every maternal instinct she possessed screaming danger despite the fact that they were standing in the house of God, surrounded by symbols of love and redemption and forgiveness. But then something in his expression made her pause, a vulnerability so raw it was almost painful to witness, like seeing someone's soul bleeding in real time. "I know how this sounds," Jamal said, quickly holding up his manicured hands in a gesture of surrender that seemed genuine rather than calculated. The confession that followed hit both women like a revelation wrapped in heartbreak, delivered with the honesty of someone who had nothing left to lose. He continued, his voice cracking slightly on the admission like expensive china, developing hairline fractures under pressure. "Today, I lost everything that mattered to me, or everything I thought mattered. $400 million gone. 15 years of work destroyed. And your daughter, this beautiful little girl, she asked me for something so simple, so pure, and I realized I've never done anything in my entire life that genuinely mattered to another human being." His eyes found Acacia's curious face, and something shifted in his expression, a softness that seemed impossible from someone who commanded corporate empires and made decisions that affected thousands of lives daily.
Sometimes the most dangerous decisions are the ones that feel like answered prayers disguised as temptation from the devil himself. Keisha stared at Jamal Washington for a full 45 seconds, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences like a computer processing data at light speed. The rational part of her brain, the part that had kept them alive and fed and housed for 7 years, screamed that this was insanity wrapped in expensive clothing and presented with a billionaire's smile. Strange men didn't materialize in churches offering life-changing sums of money without expecting something valuable in return, something that probably cost more than any amount of cash could justify. But the desperate part of her, the part that worked until her feet bled and shoes held together with duct tape and still couldn't afford to give her daughter the childhood she deserved, whispered that maybe God really did work in mysterious ways, even if those ways came wearing Armani suits. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper, each word carefully chosen like bullets being loaded into a gun. "Why would you want to do this? You don't know us from strangers on the street, don't owe us anything more than common courtesy. Rich men don't typically spend their Thursday evenings in neighborhood churches making impossible offers to single mothers who can barely afford rent." She studied his face with the intensity of a detective examining evidence.
Looking for tells, the slight twitch of an eye that indicated deception, the practiced smile that wealthy men wore when they wanted something they couldn't simply purchase through normal channels. Instead of calculated manipulation, she saw something that looked suspiciously like genuine anguish, as if his soul was hemorrhaging and he couldn't figure out how to stop the bleeding. Jamal ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, destroying the careful grooming in a gesture that seemed to strip away his billionaire facade like removing expensive makeup to reveal the real person underneath. Because 6 hours ago, I thought success meant numbers on balance sheets and my name carved into the sides of buildings that pierce the sky. Then I sat in this church listening to a little girl pray for something I took for granted my entire childhood, having someone who gave a damn about her happiness, and I realized I've never done anything that actually mattered beyond quarterly profit reports. The moment when Aaliyah broke free from her mother's protective grasp and threw her small arms around Jamal's legs was the moment Keisha realized the decision had already been made by forces beyond her control. "Does this mean you'll really be my daddy tomorrow?" her daughter asked, her voice muffled against his expensive suit pants, but radiant with the kind of hope that could either heal broken hearts or shatter them into pieces too small to ever reassemble. "You'll sit in the very front row and clap when I sing Tomorrow from Annie? And maybe afterwards we can get ice cream like real daddies and daughters do?" The trust in her voice was absolute, the kind of faith that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture. And looking down at her daughter's face, luminous with joy she rarely saw anymore, Keisha understood that some opportunities don't come twice, and some miracles arrive disguised as strangers with more money than sense and hearts that were apparently larger than their bank accounts. The moment Aaliyah Martinez stepped onto the elementary school stage in her red dress, Jamal Washington finally understood why people choose to have children and why love is the only currency that actually matters. Lincoln Elementary's auditorium buzzed with the chaotic energy of proud parents armed with smartphones and video cameras, but Jamal only had eyes on the small figure in the red dress who kept scanning the audience like a lighthouse searching for ships in a storm. When Aaliyah's gaze finally found his in the front row, exactly where he'd promised to be, wearing his best navy suit like armor against his own overwhelming emotions, her face transformed into pure sunshine, the kind of radiant joy that could power entire cities if scientists could figure out how to harness it. She waved with the uninhibited enthusiasm of a child who believed in miracles and had just witnessed one come true, and Jamal found himself waving back with equal fervor, completely forgetting that billionaire CEOs weren't supposed to make fools themselves at elementary school productions. Keisha slipped into the seat beside him like a prayer being answered, having managed to trade shifts with another waitress for the first time in 18 months. She'd changed out of her polyester work uniform into a simple blue dress that made her dark eyes seem even more luminous, and Jamal caught himself staring longer than was appropriate, noting how the soft auditorium lighting caught the elegant curve of her neck. "I can't believe you're actually here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotions she was clearly trying to contain. "I kept thinking you'd come to your senses and realize this was completely insane, that you'd send some assistant with an apology and a check to make the crazy single mother go away." Her fingers worried the program in her lap, and Jamal noticed they were calloused from years of hard work, hands that told a story of sacrifice and strength that humbled him more than any business failure ever could. "I've done plenty of insane things for money over the years," he replied quietly, his eyes fixed on the stage where children were arranging themselves for the opening number, their excited chatter filling the air like music. "But this is the first sane thing I've done for something that actually matters, something that might make the world a little brighter instead of just making my bank account a little fatter." When Aaliyah broke forward for her solo, her clear, sweet voice filling the auditorium with hope and determination, Jamal felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd sealed shut the day his own father died when he was 12 years old. She sang about tomorrow being just a day away, about the sun coming out and washing away sorrow, and every word seemed to pierce through the armor he'd built around his heart over 2 decades of corporate warfare. Around them, other parents smiled and recorded videos, but Jamal was transfixed by this brave little girl who had taught him more about courage in 2 days than he'd learned in 35 years of life. As her voice soared on the final note and the audience erupted in thunderous applause, he realized he wasn't just playing daddy for a day anymore. Somewhere between her desperate prayer and this moment of triumph, he'd started to fall in love with both the fierce, beautiful woman who'd raised such an extraordinary child and with the idea of being the kind of man who deserved to be part of their family.
The phone call that could save Jamal's empire arrived at the standing ovation, carrying with it the power to either destroy everything he discovered about love or prove that some things are worth more than all the money in the world. Jamal's phone buzzed against his chest with the persistence of a heartbeat, the vibration cutting through the thunderous applause like a knife through silk. He'd meant to silence it completely. This was Aaliyah's moment, her night to shine brighter than all the stars in the sky. But 15 years of corporate conditioning made him glance at the screen out of pure muscle memory. Marcus Chen, his business partner and closest friend, had been calling all day with updates about their failed merger, but this time the text message that followed made Jamal's carefully controlled world tilt sideways like a ship in a hurricane. Henderson changed his mind. Deals back on. $400 million secured, but board meeting in New York starts at 6 a.m. or we lose everything forever. Everything okay? Keisha asked, her warm brown eyes immediately picking up on the way his face had gone pale despite the cheerful auditorium lighting. Around them, families were gathering their things with the satisfied chaos of a successful evening, children running to their parents with post-performance adrenaline coursing through their small bodies, and Aaliyah was bouncing on her toes backstage, waiting for them to navigate through the crowd and celebrate her triumph. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal against the magnitude of what that phone call represented. Not just hundreds of millions of dollars, but the validation of everything he'd worked for since he was 18 years old and swore he'd never be poor again. The words felt like stones in his mouth, each syllable heavy with the weight of dreams being crushed by reality. "I have to go to New York," he said, hating himself for the way hope died in her eyes like candles being blown out by a cruel wind. "Tonight, there's a deal. It's complicated, but if I'm not in that boardroom by sunrise, everything I've spent 15 years building disappears like smoke." He watched understanding dawn in Keisha's expression, followed quickly by something that looked like disappointment wrapped in resignation, the look of a woman who'd learned not to expect too much from people, especially men who made promises they couldn't keep. But then Aaliyah came running toward them through the dispersing crowd, her face radiant with the kind of pure joy that could make angels weep, clutching the small bouquet of roses he'd brought her like they were made of gold and starlight. "Did you see me, Daddy Jamal?" she asked, using the title with such natural affection it felt like a knife through his heart. "Did you see how good I sang? Did I make you proud like real daughters make their daddies proud?" Her words hit him like physical blows, each question a reminder that in her innocent mind, he wasn't going anywhere. In her world, Daddy stayed for ice cream and bedtime stories and all the small moments that actually mattered. Looking at her shining face, then at Keisha's carefully neutral expression,
Jamal realized he was about to make the most important business decision of his life, and for the first time, it had absolutely nothing to do with money. Jamal Washington had spent 15 years climbing to the top of the business world on a ladder made of sacrificed relationships and abandoned dreams, but it took a 7-year-old girl's unconditional love to show him what success actually looked like when measured in moments that mattered. The private jet sat waiting on the rain-slicked tarmac like a metal bird ready to carry him toward the biggest financial triumph of his career and away from the most important discovery of his life. His phone had been ringing nonstop for the past hour, board members, lawyers, investors, all demanding his immediate presence in Manhattan, their voices sharp with the kind of desperation that came from watching $400 million hang in the balance. Marcus made the stakes crystal clear, missed this meeting, and their company would face bankruptcy within 6 months, taking with it the jobs of 3,000 employees and the dreams of countless shareholders who trusted him with their financial futures. 15 years of 18-hour days, missed holidays, and relationships sacrificed on the altar of ambition would disappear into corporate history like smoke from a dying fire. "You should go," Keisha said suddenly, stopping beside his Bentley in the elementary school parking lot, her voice steady as bedrock, despite the storm she could see brewing in her eyes. "You should go. This was beautiful tonight, what you did for her, for us, but we both know this isn't real life, right? You have responsibilities, important decisions to make, an empire to save. We'll be fine. We always are." Her words were carefully chosen, designed to give him an easy exit, the same way she probably learned to make it simple for everyone else to leave so the disappointment wouldn't cut quite so deep when they inevitably chose something else over her and Aaliyah. But Aaliyah had different ideas entirely, her small hand gripping his suit jacket with the determination of someone who'd already lost too many people to let another one slip away without a fight. "But you promised we could get ice cream at Miller's Creamery, and you tell me about all the places you've traveled," she protested, her bright eyes beginning to fill with the kind of tears that could break grown men's hearts into pieces too small to ever repair. "You promised you'd help me practice my lines for the Christmas play, and that maybe we could build a tree house in our backyard if Mama says it's okay." Her voice carried the confusion of childhood, that bewildering moment when adult priorities collide with the simple logic of love and promises made in good faith. The decision that changed everything came not from his head, but from a heart he'd forgotten he possessed, speaking words that surprised everyone, including himself. "What if I stayed?" The question hung in the night air like a challenge to the universe itself, defying every rule of business he'd ever learned. What if I told Marcus to handle New York without me, and I kept my promise to take my girls out for ice cream? The possessive pronoun slipped out naturally, and he saw Keisha's sharp intake of breath, the way her eyes whitened with something that might have been hope or terror or both. "I've spent 15 years building something I thought would make me happy, chasing numbers on spreadsheets and my name on buildings, but I've never felt as proud as I did watching you sing tonight, sweetheart. And I've never met anyone as strong as your mother, anyone who could teach me what real success looks like." 6 months later, as Jamal watched 8-year-old Aaliyah blow out her birthday candles while Keisha laughed beside him in the backyard of their new home, the one with the big oak tree perfect for tree houses and a kitchen where they cooked breakfast every Sunday morning, he couldn't even remember the name of the company that had tried to buy his soul that night. The business had not only survived without him, but flourished under Marcus's leadership, proving that the world would keep turning even when he chose love over leverage, family over finance. But more importantly, he'd learned that the best investments weren't measured in quarterly returns or stock options, but in bedtime stories that made little girls giggle, in the way his wife's eyes lit up when he walked through the door each evening, and in the knowledge that he was building something far more valuable than an empire. He was building a legacy of love that would outlast any corporate dynasty. Some deals were worth walking away from, and some families were worth everything you thought you couldn't live without.
Wow, what an emotional journey, right? From a little girl's desperate prayer to a billionaire finding out what really matters in life. Daddy for a Day is the kind of story that stays with you long after the ending. But I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city, your state, or your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Eat Earth and flashlight emoji. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you tear up or smile when Jamal finally chose love over money, then don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button right now. That way you'll never miss the next emotional story that will pull on your heartstrings. Tell me in the comments, did